Hi everyone, welcome back to Double Helix History. This is our fourth episode.
In the first half of our podcast, we're going to be finding out more about the phenomenon of family history, the ways in which people learn about it, the way in which it brings together a community of scholars, researchers, the way in which it creates education opportunities.
We'll also be considering more widely the public understanding of DNA. This section features an interview with Turi King, who, amongst other things, is the woman who dug up Richard III.
The research that we're going to be sharing with you over the next couple of podcasts is based on a set of interviews and focus groups that we've been undertaking in the United Kingdom, in the United States, and in Australia. We decided on a model of focus groups where we would essentially go into family history societies, family history organisations, meet with a selected group of people and discuss with them their practice and the way that they think about genetics and family history. And the reason for this was that there is a relatively large amount of work on family history, but not a great deal of it actually asks the people who do the work what they think. So really, this was very much a kind of research project that was led by the people who were doing the work themselves. I wanted to find out what they thought. I wanted to investigate how they conceived of this challenge to their discipline, and to give them the kind of opportunity to talk about what they're up to. And I have to say that it really, really changed my mind about certain things. I learned loads talking to these people around the world. And I really liked being able to give them a kind of voice in this, because family history as a kind of practice is oftentimes ignored by scholars, particularly ignored by kind of mainstream history, you might say, although largely that's changing. And it was really nice to be able to sort of meet these family historians and just listen to what they had to say and listen to their amazing stories and thoughts and their contributions.
Doing this sort of model of focus groups and direct interviews, on the one hand it perhaps might seem slightly sort of anthropological, ethnographic approach to research, but do you think the fact that rather than necessarily being subjects of research, these people are highly skilled, highly knowledgeable researchers themselves adds, changes the research practice of the project as a whole?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's why I was so interested in talking to this group of people, because I'd worked on family historians for some time, and it was very clear that they were smart and they were highly thoughtful and highly motivated. It was very clear to me that they were a community that was highly organised, very, very organised, much more so than other communities that have kind of cognate interests, but also that they were very self-conscious about that, and they were very self-aware. This is not a community that is kind of stumbling around directionless. This is not a group of people who aren't, thoughtful about what they're doing. There's a kind of self-reflective quality about most every family historian that I've ever spoken to. So I find that amazing, and they're very generous as well. So you have this kind of incredible community. And part of me wonders why people haven't done this before, because there's a kind of huge need on the part of the family history community, I think, to be not validated, but to engage with scholarship. They really want to talk to people. They're really interested in other things and really, generous and with their time and their expertise. But at the same time, I think slightly worried about and slightly nervous of that. The reason I wanted to do this was to kind of get into talking with these folk. But at the same time, as you say, they were already going to be asking me questions and coming back. I mean, it's not a kind of, the research process is not one way. In the UK, research with wider communities outside higher education is conceived of now as knowledge exchange, and it very much was an idea of knowledge exchange as far as I was concerned. They were as part of the project as I was. They were as deeply important to the project as I was, and as we'll hear from some of them over the next couple of episodes of this podcast. And they're smart, thoughtful people who really are pushing the bounds of what research is happening on the field, and they're really doing amazingly methodologically innovative stuff. So I think they need to be kind of brought into the fold a little bit. Raphael Samuel said that history is a social form of knowledge, and family history is a very good example of the fact that, we need to be conceiving of how people understand their past and how they work their past through, and excluding anyone in that just seems silly, really.
That's what's working.
I think there's a personality thing involved. You've got to have a level of determination and doggedness. I will not be beaten by this.
Oh, that sounds so familiar, doesn't it?
Well, I'm trying to put it
Very
into...
rare that we have to send somebody away with no results at all. Very rare.
Yeah, because there's a lot of monotony, and a lot of at times it's just you're going, and sometimes that's the only way you can do something is go through a list of just.
I think it just
go
takes a
down
certain
and down.
personality, honestly. don't
Yeah,
you think?
and you can just get cross-eyed.
Because
But
most people are not interested.
but I get the feeling of at times when you finally make that breakthrough. And there are times where you go back and you hit somebody who you've hit a brick wall on, and every now and then you just go back to it. Look at it with fresh eyes. Those kinds of things, I think, really. There's a certain satisfaction, I think, from getting that.
Exactly.
Finding out who my grandfather's birth mother was, finally getting that down. I was like, it
That's
just
amazing,
ecstatic,
yeah.
I think you have to be a bit of a sleuth with
A sleuth.
A sleuth.
That's
yes.
a face order.
And I think they're quite different to me. I don't think you have to be so methodical with the paper trail stuff. I think it pays
Except
to
if you
be.
get the wrong person and sort of go off on a tangent and
Yes, well maybe I'm more methodical than that.
and you realise.
But I think the more you document and the better the notes you keep. Of course, you stop yourself from doing the same thing over and over and over 10 years later. But I think there's more the thrill of the chase. I think with the paper trail stuff, and I think you can be a bit more intuitive and sort of. I've always got my thinking. No, what could possibly be such and such? That could be, and you constantly trying to solve a puzzle. DNA, I find overwhelming.
That's solving a puzzle. This is where I
love it.
I think it's solving a puzzle. It's a mathematical puzzle. I used to do Sudokus, but now I do.
Oh yes, me too.
I haven't done one since, But so
I think the DNA puzzle is you need to be much more rigorous, and you don't get as many hits. It's not as quick.
So one really important aspect of family history is the way in which communities work together to improve the skills of its members, to work together on specific problems or collaborate on specific projects, which it's almost breathtaking the amount of collaborative community skill building that goes on.
Yeah, it's really amazing. And these communities are incredibly wide. Some communities are small groups that work within family history organisations, so very close local groups working across particular issues and particular ideas. But also there are communities that span the globe. There are groups on social networks, there are blogs and discussion postings. And actually family historians are really, really good at talking with one another and helping one another out. It's really a kind of prime thing that you see about family history is how generous and how helpful with their expertise people seem to be.
Obviously, genealogy is a whole new or relatively new facet of this skill set that is required by family historians. There are crossovers, really, aren't there, with the kind of work people have already done, the kind of skills they've already built up, but also there's this new range of skills, this new range of potentially interested people who are being drawn in by the DNA side of things.
Yeah, I mean, oftentimes when we've talked with people, they've said that initially they were a bit nervous about getting working with this material, and quite a lot of people have had to teach themselves a lot of stuff. If you think about the ways in which family historians use their evidence, they're very sort of robust kind of investigators of information, and suddenly they're being given this whole new load of material, which looks like it might be really useful, but you have to have this particular skill set to understand. So there's a kind of real concern amongst the community that they are having to build up these kinds of bits of knowledge and these skills from scratch. But then there's also a lot of people we've spoken with who are really excited about that, who have found that actually, suddenly this speaks to a different way of researching that they really like, or something they may have bought from their career, something they're interested in anyway. So there's a kind of a real challenge to the community, but also I think it's rising to it really fast. And what's amazing looking at family historians is how quickly they can respond as a community to these kinds of challenges. If you think about, genetic genealogy's only been around since 2012 in any kind of really, really major way. And we're talking about 7-8 years later. Not only are family historians at the forefront of understanding this information and this data, they're also starting to be now spokespeople for genetic understanding of all kinds of other things. So family historians are those talking most carefully about the ethical implications of using genetic information for police procedural matters. They're being spoken with about anything to do with kind of public and popular understanding of genetics.
Well, this is very far from sitting in an archive and looking at birth records. This is like data.
It's all connected.
It's trying to give you clues as to where to look. Within the tree, and this sort of trying to home in on the name or the surname variations.
And the reason I'm asking about kind of how you get hold of this stuff is is it similar to, is working with this information similar to working with the data that you normally work with, text stuff that you work with? Do you think you're using similar kind of skills? You're kind of engaging with it in a similar way. You're reading it in a similar way.
Well, we all use a genealogy program anyway for for putting our data in, whether you use Family Tree Maker or Family Historian. We all have some form of data.
But lay people can understand documents.
Yes,
I guess is one thing. So I've done things like, say, sent a newspaper article from 1820 to a relative, or, a photo of a church or something, and everybody understands a photo or a document. But I've never bothered to share the DNA because nobody gets it, They just want to know.
You have to spend a lot of hours on that getting it, don't you? I mean, unless you're a geneticist by training or whatever, it is a lot of new information.
Yeah,
I agree. You should work your way through, ploddingly through, rather than just plug it in.
It's not a shortcut to take a shortcut because then you get overwhelmed and you don't get anything out.
I've become an expert on spreadsheets.
So it's Excel. It's all about Excel.
As I said, we've tested with 6 people, and my parents have both passed away. I've only got one living uncle who's 91, and he kindly tested. So obviously anybody who he matches with, we know, has to be on my mum's side. So basically, it's colour-coded, and I've got, I think there's about 1,300 lines of just names of contacts in Ancestry and how we believe we're related. Some we have confirmed through paper trail, others are through common matches, and some are big question marks. And with the chromosome stuff, it's another spreadsheet, total chromosome matches all, and then coming down to Y-DNA, mitochondrial, etc., and the same thing. And what I'm trying to do is get a picture, and I've kind of put it into family groups, like, mum's side, dad's side, and probably 4, like, so grandparents, and try and get a picture using the DNA, the endpoints, chromosome stuff, of where people fit in our big picture, or where we fit in their big picture.
So mapping that onto your other bits of information as well.
Yeah, well, they've now become, I've kind of pulling them from GenMatch and Family Tree DNA and other places into one spot, so at least we've got a spot we can work from, and trying to build up a story.
I'd say probably the only skill that I've developed more of has been the computer skills.
Yeah.
I mean, I've used a computer since about the 80s, but just getting it to work for you and coming up with some results. But then again, we're talking about the help desk. We get so many people who've never done any research before and they want to. And as you're sitting there, even down to booting up the computer, logging in, and then where the sites are that are free to get into here, you're talking them through everything so that you know, well, he's sensible enough to be able to pick this up. So once I've gone through showing him how he is and his parents and their marriage and that is, you can go away and you can copy.
Yeah, but other people perhaps need a bit more hand-holding at times.
Some do, but hopefully some of them you suss them out that, yeah, he can use a computer, he just needs showing the way, which sites, how to go from one step to the other.
Yeah, so that's teaching skills, isn't it, really? That's training.
Yeah, we're not.
Yeah.
We don't. No, we don't really look on ourselves as teaching anything. But
well, you might not. But I mean, you are, aren't you? Because if you're.
I suppose if you look at it that way, you don't think of it like that.
You are training people. You are helping people to understand how to do things.
Yeah, because we always say we're not here to do it for you.
No.
We're here to show you, and you
How
go
to.
away and do it yourselves if you can.
I think group working does help, especially brick walls, because you raise, I've got a problem with this. Chances are somebody else in the group's been there, done that, and they would say, oh yeah, what you need is so and so. Our group here in Buxton, we meet once a month, and we've got people that have done a lot on Irish research, myself in Scotland, others in Wales, and if there's a question comes up about Scottish research, everybody's eyes move towards me. I'm supposed to have the answer. And something that is quite basic, or to me it is, but yeah, it's useful to share. As I said earlier, that was part of the idea of having a network group. So the group leaders can share with 15, 17 other groups, different ideas.
This is Turi King, a Professor of Genetics from Leicester. Turi is a public historian. She's a geneticist. She's very interested in the public understanding of science and in communication. And particularly Turi is well known to the public through her work on the genetic makeup of the sample set that was dug up in Leicester that turned out to be from King Richard III.
So obviously you're a geneticist, biologist by training. How did you get into the history side and the really sort of public history and engagement side of things?
So actually I started off in archaeology and anthropology, both in Canada, and then my Cambridge degree was archaeology and anthropology. And I got really interested in kind of how genetics would answer questions within archaeology and history. So I actually came at it from an archaeology and history thing, and then into genetics and using genetics to look at history. And then obviously the Richard III case came along, and people knew I had this slightly unusual background, and that's how I got into it. When I was doing my PhD, it was on the link between a person's surname, hereditary surname in Britain, and the Y chromosome. And the Y chromosome is a piece of DNA that comes down through the generations like a surname, down through the male line. So this is at the time when genetic genealogy is starting to take off, and so I would do a lot of public lectures and go and talk to family history groups and this sort of thing. I just found I really enjoyed the sort of public engagement side.
So you visited and talked to lots of family
family
historians.
history groups. Who do you think you are live? They would have me come down and sort of talk about the work that I was doing. Obviously I was working doing the Y chromosome and sort of the Viking project, and obviously people are very interested in genetic genealogy, and then I was working with Mark Scully on sort of the sociology behind that, and that whole project arose around because I would be going out and talking to family history groups and genetic genealogy groups, and I would have men who would be asking me if they could take part in the study, and if I could tell them if, they would ask, am I a Viking? So present tense. I found that really interesting because obviously the Vikings are around 1,000 years ago. There aren't any Vikings around now. So I was really, really interested in how people use genetics as part of their identity, and that led to a wider project. And obviously that means then going out, talking to groups and asking people to take part. So it's just been one of these things that's kind of snowballed. Then obviously Richard III project came along, and the public interest in that has been phenomenal, and so it kind of put my public engagement stuff on steroids, and now I've been going on and I talk all over the place to various different groups about the project. So yeah, no, I really enjoy it, and one of the nice things, as I say, is that because people, they can identify with the sort of the history and the genealogy, and you can slip in some quite complex genetics and science stuff into there as well, which is quite a nice thing to be able to do.
Fantastic, thank you. What do you think? Oh no, let me rephrase that question. The fascination with genetics and using genetics to, in quotes, prove something about genealogy, about history. What do you think where does that power come from for people?
Well, that's really interesting because as I say, I mean, I spend a lot of my time telling people that genetics is not the silver bullet. It's a layer of information that you can apply to larger studies and also to personal things. So it's very useful for people in terms of if they have a particular sort of genealogical mystery in their family where, you know, the story is that grandma's actually descended from this, then you can use sometimes genetics to help sort of decide whether or not that seems to be likely or not. And so I do find this really interesting about how you can use genetics for this sort of thing, but you have to use other bits of information as well. But yes, there definitely is this public perception of genetics is the answer. And as a geneticist, I'm the first person to tell you that no, it isn't.
I think I asked you this earlier after your talk, but particularly with Richard III, if you hadn't have been able to get that DNA match, do you think it would have mattered? Do you think it would have made a
Well,
huge
so this
difference?
was the thing, as I say, so when we were doing the project, the archaeologists were saying, you know, if this was 30 years ago and we didn't have the DNA, we would have said, look, on the balance of all of the evidence, we would say that this is him. And certainly if you do the statistics, and you have to include all of the strands of evidence in that, genetics is just one of those. If you take the genetics out, actually all of the rest of the evidence is stronger than the genetics on its own. You put the genetics in and it becomes stronger again. So it's a very, very interesting thing. I think that people would have gone based on what the evidence was. That it certainly did look like Richard, and the DNA just added an extra level to that.
And what did you make of the way in which the genetic testing you did was reported regarding Richard, but also the sort of the sidelines that you found out about non-paternity events?
That's right. So for one thing, again, it comes back to this idea that genetics is seen as kind of like the defining evidence. So I know that people were definitely waiting for the genetic results, and obviously that put a huge amount of pressure on me, and I've spent a huge amount of time saying genetics is just one of the strands of evidence with all of these sorts of things. Yes, I mean, one of the things that we did find was if you're looking at the male line relatives of Richard III, they don't match the skeletal remains, and that is not remotely surprising to me because we know that false paternities or non-paternities happen. So this is where the biological father is not the one that's in the records. And that happens about 1 to 2% per generation historically from various studies. So it doesn't affect the identification, but it was just very, very interesting to see how the press really took that and ran with it. And the questions I had to field about, you know, should Queen Elizabeth be on the throne? And I had to say, ooh, back up. We don't know, where this false paternity would have taken place in the 19 generations that we know about, and there could have been more than one. Second of all, it doesn't affect the Queen because there's not a straight line from the Tudors straight down to Queen Elizabeth anyways. But it was just really interesting that was what a lot of the press really latched on, not just here, but in other countries. Okay. And I did lots and lots of interviews, you know, as far away as Russia about, you know, should Queen Elizabeth be on the throne. And it was a lot of kind of firefighting and saying, "Oh, no, this is a non-story." So yeah.
I guess this is totally off the top of my head, but it's almost like when you base your system of sort of constitution on people being born to certain people, I think that it then gives a certain cachet to genetics.
It does, and what genetics will show you is that sometimes that isn't actually the case.
So you've worked on numerous DNA and public history projects, the Viking DNA project, Richard III, obviously, and your latest one is in Jamestown, in Virginia. Do you think particularly with these big projects that perhaps get a lot of press coverage and you're perhaps dealing with celebrity bodies and celebrity DNA, do you think they're valuable as a sort of public engagement, public education tool?
These sorts of cases are sort of single cases, but they are useful as a way of opening up the public in terms of learning about wider issues to do with ancient DNA and genetic genealogy. So yes, I mean, while they are kind of single, as you say, celebrity cases, they do act as that way of explaining about genetics in a wider context.
Wonderful. And particularly thought it's interesting the way that you made the DNA data from Richard public for the Y and the mitochondrial, and eventually perhaps the whole genome.
Yeah, the whole genome.
So people can go off and play hack it.
That's right.
Compare it to their own.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and one of the things that I really like is obviously there's so much that we don't know about our DNA and what certain sections do and so on and so forth. So I like the idea that the life of the project goes beyond my involvement and the researchers' involvement, in that it becomes a public resource. And so say in a few years' time we understand the genetic basis for a particular trait, people can go and have a look at Richard's DNA and see whether or not he might have been genetically predisposed or so on and so forth. And it's also useful for showing that most things are multigenic, so there's lots and lots of different genetic variants that might be involved in a particular thing. So it's the sort of thing that you can kind of use it as an educational tool to go, well, this doesn't mean necessarily that he had this, but he might have been genetically predisposed to it. But genetics is not the whole story. There's other factors that go on, nutrition, maternal health, environment, so on and so things that shape us who we are. DNA is not everything.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Before you signed up to the first test or whatever, what was your awareness of DNA testing? What did you know about DNA generally? Were you...
Nothing really.
Joe
my
Kyle.
case.
Yeah.
Very effective.
Well, true, yes.
Well, I mean, that kind of is, it's kind of is family history, almost. It's been used in quite a similar way.
Yeah,
in
exactly.
some
But
cases.
it's very effective, isn't it? I mean, conclusive. Not your child.
It really is relatively recent.
Yeah.
And I knew nothing. Absolutely nothing. And I'm a scientist by degree. But 5 years ago, I knew DNA existed, and I knew about Watson and Crick because I'm a chemist. But that was about the limit of it. And it's really about attending seminars, lectures, reading some books on the basics. I mean, the kids in school know more than most of us because they're getting taught it.
I think the DNA business can get very complicated very quickly, and that it scares off a lot of people who want to use it for genealogical purposes. I think, like yourself, you're saying, oh, good Lord, I don't want to have to go back to college and get a master's in genetics in order to figure out what am I supposed to be doing here. Right. And so I think what I'm seeing is that there's this big disconnect between most of the programs you go to that say, what do I do with my DNA information? And they get down in there and they're going to discuss alleles and they're going to, give you all these new scientific words. And that's not what the average genealogist is looking for. They're looking for checklists that says, spit in tube, get results. They want to, they find relatives. Right, and now, literally, exactly. They want, upload results to this, run this thing, this is how that works. Find your relatives.
Yeah, that's it.
That's all they want.
Simple.
Most of us in pure genealogy are just not looking to know whether or not, you have the allele that makes you subject to passing on cystic fibrosis. This is just not what the purpose of this is.
I remember back in grade school when I first started teaching about DNA, and they basically went straight to the fruit fly and the fruit fly concept as if this, to make it simplified for grade schoolers. Okay, so here's the deal with the eye color. If it's a big B, it's a dominant gene. If it's a little b, which is for blue, that would be a recessive gene. So if you have a big B, and a little B or two big B's, you have brown eyes. And if you have two little B's, you have blue eyes. And even at that time, I thought, that doesn't make any sense. What about people who have hazel eyes?
Well, there was a scandal in my brother's school over that exact example that you just gave.
Right.
When my brother was in 7th grade in grammar school, the teacher gave that similar exact example and said, therefore, if your parents both have blue eyes, you can't have brown eyes. And this girl went home, and her parents called, and I mean, I'm not kidding, it was like a scandal. The parents were livid. They were livid because, of course, she had brown eyes.
Mm-hmm. But I'm assuming she was actually their biological daughter.
And they were very convinced. Of course, this was pre-DNA. Maybe the husband was the one that was the most outraged.
The level of knowledge that people have about DNA when they start to do work in this area is pretty varied. Some people have done some work at school, some people have even gone to university that we spoke to, some people have worked in the area, some people are scientists of a variety of kinds. But even so, in order to use their information well, in order to understand how to use genetic information for the genealogical and family history purposes, there's a lot of skills they need to kind of acquire.
And as you say, there's people who have some sort of professional background or educational background in biology, but then there's people who may not have even been taught about DNA when they're at school. I mean, there's plenty of people who do family history who were alive when DNA was first discovered.
Absolutely.
And so, but as a sort of public science, science engagement sort of project, it's potentially one of the biggest in the world, this huge uptake of DNA genealogy.
Exactly, and everyone who is involved in this, from us as scholars working on it to those who are skilling people in the family history organisations to those who are running major companies in this area, have a kind of duty to this genetic education, don't they?
Yeah, I think so, and hopefully that is what we're doing through these podcasts, through our project more generally, through the presentations we do, but also importantly, in January 2019 at the Science and Industry Museum in Manchester, we had our platform for investigation, where we brought together geneticists, scientists, archaeologists, historians and genealogists, and we met, I think it was over 700 people on that day.
Yeah, it was a great day. We went to the Science and Industry Museum and had a great big space between the rocket and Baby, the first computer. And we basically, the point was that we were going to introduce as many people as we could, over 700 as Matt said, to some of the kind of cutting edge work in genetics today, and particularly work in ancient genetics, work in family history, work in disease and pathology, work in cancer research. We had people attending and presenting from the Natural History Museum, from the Crick Institute in London, from the University of Sheffield, from the University of Liverpool, and all across the kind of northwest really. It was really fun.
So we're with Tom Booth. I just need to remember, if I need to say that, or else when I'm going back I'll be like, who the hell was I talking to? It was his Burnley accent. So, you're having some good conversations with people?
Yeah. So what we're doing is sort of talking about the predictions of eye, skin, hair, colour and lactose tolerance in ancient individuals from all over Europe, and getting people to guess or have a guess at what they think those traits were at different time periods in Europe, and then seeing what their assumptions are or aren't in certain cases about what people would have looked like, and then showing them the result and explaining why the result is as it is. So I think it's the results are surprising some people, I think, because there's an assumption that the people in the past, the people in the past are the same as the people in the present, and you get the Irish individual from a few thousand years ago, and everyone gives them red hair and basically does a leprechaun model.
Do you have a little photo of Cheddar Man that you pull out at the end and go da-da?
No, well, we didn't. We did this before we did Cheddar Man, so he's kind of not part of it. I should have brought something along about Cheddar Man, but I forgot to stupidly. But I don't know, weirdly, you kind of assume that everyone's seen it, but they haven't. A lot of people haven't seen it because there was so much furore around it at the time. You know, you feel like you're so deep inside it, you lose sense of. You assume just everyone's seen it, you lose sense of everything. But you know, there's a lot of people who knew. You know, most people come here know nothing about it.
Oh, okay.
You know, even if it was a big media thing, most people are surprised about the revelations about people in Mesolithic Europe potentially having darker skin and lighter eyes. Even though it felt like it was a big story back in time, so it really shows that dissemination is something that you have to really keep having to knock on that door until.
So then the value of stuff like today, to even if it's one person at a time, to
yeah,
just slowly.
For sure, and I think with this, like when the kids do it, they kind of see it more as playing a game, and hopefully I feel like that they're kind of taking in the kind of the learning aspects as they're doing it, and not really thinking about it, but then it will be in there that they understand that I looked at this ancient person from Germany, and they had these particular characteristics and things. So yeah, it seems to go well. People seem to engage with this. Using emojis helps me. Emojis is such an easy shorthand.
Yeah, like it.
For stuff. It's old emojis now. Like you can see, it's not the updated high res ones. It's like
He was talking about climbing up. I don't know if you want that recorded.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. As I say, my only story I've got about DNA is a double helix in Newcastle. I was really drunk on a stag do. We climbed to the top of it. You know the one where shopping trolleys. Sat on the top.
Nice.
I don't even remember it. It was just pictures sent to me the day after.
You should come down and visit the crick, because we have a DNA statue outside.
Oh yeah.
It's be about 3 stories high.
Yeah,
so you can come down and climb that.
You get a lot one. Well, this one in Newcastle is pretty high. I remember looking at the picture thinking, if I'd fell, I would have been a goner, you know.
So is it easy to climb? Sorry, is it easy to climb?
It's almost like a ladder going round, isn't it? You know?
Yeah, so similar to that model there with the
and they've got a shopping trolley on the end of each arm coming out.
Right.
So, and I'm a climber. Yeah, I'm into climbing a lot. So I think.
Yeah, well, you're the first person I've met that's climbed DNA.
Yeah. But it's just so. Do you know what about these days? Do you know all those lines? I take it they're all. It's all done by a computer, the lines. So
no, yes, what you do is you extract the DNA. So if this was an individual, you'd extract the DNA, and then there are ways of chopping it up. It's called restriction enzymes. So they chop the DNA up at very specific sequences, and then the pattern of fragments that you get out afterwards will be unique to the sample. So if I was to take your DNA and chop it up, and you take my DNA and chop it up, you'd make a different pattern.
Okay.
So, and then you can use the pattern to then match back to the DNA that's come from the individual. So that's how they sort of use the term, like DNA fingerprinting at crime scenes.
Oh, I see.
That's how they do paternity testing and genotyping.
So what we got here, Nicholas?
So we have a virtual reality headset, and I've got a nice structure of some DNA that it's nice and still.
Okay.
And you can just hold that to your face and have a little look around and tell me what the structure looks like.
Right, I'm going to hold it up to my eyes now.
Yeah. So you can look up, down, left, right. You should be able to follow the structure.
Oh, and there's a red dot.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm looking at molecules now.
What can you see?
I'm looking at a double helix, aren't I?
Yep.
And there I can see the sort of the pentagons and the hexagon shapes of. Are these the base pairs?
Yeah. So the base pairs. Some of the base pairs are small and are just a hexagon shape, and some of them are big, like a hexagon fused to a pentagon. And they pair with each other, so you should see that some of them are like opposite each other on the different chains.
Yeah.
And they should, different parts of them should be different colours. What colours can you see?
We've got blue bits.
Good.
And we've got red bits.
Red bits.
So I'm assuming we've got different atoms, different elements at different points.
Yeah, so the dark blue bits are nitrogen. You can see there's a lot of nitrogen around.
Yeah.
The red bits, which there's not so much of, is oxygen. And then everything else is carbon.
Okay.
And we haven't shown the hydrogens because that makes the structure very complicated.
Yeah, there'd be like loads. There'd be them on every corner essentially, would there?
So this is just a nice way that people can explore what it would look like if we zoomed really far into a DNA molecule.
Oh, whoa, okay, I've just moved across and now I'm looking all the way down from the top.
Yeah, so there should be two structures. There's one you can look along and there's one you can look down the middle of.
Oh, wow. It's almost like a tunnel.
Yeah. And it helps you to see all the bases going round and the fact that it is a double helix.
It's a double helix.
Yeah, so we haven't got any DNA yet.
Wicked. And how's that gone down with the general public?
Lots of people have enjoyed it. They've enjoyed the fact it's virtual reality, I think, is one thing. And everyone seems to have been able to identify that it is double helix and ask lots of questions about the different colours and the different parts, and then listens to explanations about what those are. And it's prompted some discussions sort of about what that means and where you might find this in your body and things like that. So, all in all.
What do you find the general level of knowledge of DNA is for people sort of coming into this? Members of the public.
So I think the knowledge is pretty good. People tend to know or tend to have an explanation for what DNA is, and normally something along the lines of instructions or things that make you what you are, or things that you get from your parents, which is quite nice. Lots of them seem to be able to identify that it is a double helix, which is quite nice, so I don't have to prompt them to say that, which is good. But they really enjoy the fact that they can actually see it and explore it at their own pace, which is quite nice.
What did you know about DNA before you came here today?
I didn't really know what it was. All I knew is what I'd learnt at school, which is that it's in the nucleus of cells, but I didn't know what it did.
Wow. That's a
I knew
good
it
start.
it was like different, like I don't know how to explain it, like different like parts, like characteristics and stuff. But that was about it.
But you feel like today you've learned a lot more?
I think it's cool. I think it's like really like fascinating when you like get into it, and especially like when you do it as well. Like
you're able to see it.
Yeah, but see, like when you can hear about it and you'll be like, oh, okay, cool. But like when you actually do it and see it in like your own eyes and see it own light, you're like, okay, it's nice.
It makes it more interesting than just hearing it in a classroom.
So you haven't done anything like that kind of experiment at school?
No.
Oh, wow. So that was a great experience then.
Yeah.
Did you learn much about like how DNA can help you learn about history and about the past?
Well, we talked to one woman who talked to her about it with animals and learning about where they'd come from and how they'd moved and stuff. Looking at the bones or something.
Fantastic. Wonderful. So you had a good day?
Yeah, it's been good.
And do you want to be scientists?
I'd quite like to go into medicine or something like that.
Oh, wicked. You get to wear the white coat every day.
Yeah.
Hi, Felly.
Yes.
What have you been working on for the last 6 years?
I've basically been working a lot on chickens and their introductions into Europe, because actually chickens aren't native to Europe or to England. They actually originate from Southeast Asia. And they were domesticated there, and then they brought over by human societies into Europe. So looking at archaeology with a team of archaeologists who do different subdisciplines, like isotopes, like metrics, and I bring in the genetics, then we can combine all our efforts and try to understand how chickens came into Britain.
Fantastic. And you've been having fun today?
Oh, it's been brilliant. A lot of people who actually know quite a lot about chickens compared to what I usually get.
Really? Like where chickens come from?
A lot of them don't actually know they're not native, which is quite surprising, because a lot of people usually don't know that they're native to like England. No, they're not native to England. Sorry. And just in general, how they're dispersed, or the different breeds, or a lot of interesting questions. And the kids enjoy the game.
Did you know that this event was on about DNA today?
I didn't.
No.
The kids said to me last night, "Mum, can we go somewhere tomorrow?" I was like, right, well, let's go to the museum. It's like, it's an industry. Cheap and cheerful.
Yeah. Well, they clearly
really enjoyed it. Usually we just walk round and there's no one here to explain anything. That's why it's fab that we've come today and learn more.
Yeah. Have you learned about DNA as well today?
I've enjoyed it.
What, like before you came today, what did you know about DNA?
I didn't know anything. I didn't know anything. No. Like, when we were talking about the animals around there, like chickens weren't even here originally, were they? Little things like that, and you think, you just expect them to have been here forever.
Because they're just like everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah, it's been interesting. The kids I know have enjoyed it. Definitely. Yeah. I hope you do more of them.
Yeah, well, I know they do things here like every 3 weeks or so. They have like something, but I don't know. It's really cool to have like the scientists not in the lab, but
Yeah, practical side rather than just walking around looking and reading. Because the kids get a bit bored, don't they? But hands on, they love it. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Brill, thank you.
No, thank you very much. So that's all we've got time for today, I'm afraid. Thank you very much for listening to Double Helix History, and we hope to see you again very soon.